We turn to First Minister's questions. Question number 1, Jackson Carlow.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I will now try artfully to dance around that comment that you've just made. The SNP's named person policy, which would allow public authorities to share confidential information about children in Scotland without either the child or young person or her parent being aware, has been utterly discredited. Last month, even the expert panel set up by the Scottish Government to try and make sense of this declared they couldn't. First Minister, they were right, weren't they?
First Minister.
Well, the Deputy First Minister will make a statement on this later this afternoon. I will not preempt the detail of that statement, but I will make some general comments about the direction of travel. The Deputy First Minister's statement will do three things in general terms. Firstly, it will set out the Government's response to the GIRFEC Practice Development Panel's report. That report will be published this afternoon. Secondly, he will set out the implications for the statutory underpinning of the named person policy. And thirdly, he will set out how we intend to support and indeed seek to improve current GIRFEC practice, particularly around the important issue of information sharing. Lastly, Presiding Officer, let me be clear, though, that young people across Scotland already benefit from a named point of contact. That is usually a health visitor or a promoted teacher. We want that to continue, and we want to ensure that councils and indeed practitioners are well supported with the right guidance to help them fulfil their roles effectively. So that's the general thrust of what the Deputy First Minister will outline. Carlow is able to hold this government to account. He's rightly able to do that right now. Members will be able to do it when the Deputy First Minister issues a statement later this afternoon. Of course, nobody is able to hold the Tory government in Westminster to account right now because Parliament is suspended. This government is increasing the number of health visitors. We're investing massively in perinatal mental health support, for example, increasing mental health counsellors in our schools, doing everything we can to protect vulnerable children from the impact of austerity and cuts to welfare that are being imposed by Jackson Carlow's party. So we are doing a range of things to make sure that we are supporting and protecting vulnerable children in every way that we can, and we will continue to do that. These are complex issues. These are, by their very nature, sensitive issues and often controversial issues. There are rarely easy answers. So we will continue to take the right steps. We will continue to listen to experts and we will continue to set out plans that sees this government and I hope this Parliament fulfil its obligation to those who work in the front line with children who are at risk, and indeed any child living in vulnerable circumstances. And the Deputy First Minister will set out more detail of that when he stands up this afternoon.
Question number 2, Richard Leonard.
Presiding Officer, this morning, Audit Scotland has delivered a damning verdict on the state of university finance under this government's watch. University funding has been cut by more than 11% over the past 5 years. As a result, more than half of our universities are now in deficit. We used to be proud of the international reputation of our universities, but the European Universities Association calls Scottish higher education, and I quote them, a declining system under pressure. Universities Scotland say, and I quote them, government funding for universities is decreasing at a faster rate than the Scottish Government's budget, suggesting university funding has been deprioritised. Can the First Minister explain why our universities have been deprioritised by her government?
First Minister.
Well, I don't know about Richard Leonard, but I am still proud of the international reputation of Scottish universities. And whenever I meet people from other countries or travel overseas, including yesterday in Germany, I meet people who are envious of the reputation and the record and the performance of Scottish universities. In terms of the Audit Scotland report today, I would firstly point to the fact that in this financial year, resources to universities, the higher education budget has increased. The report also sets out that the total income in the sector has increased over the past few years. Of course, resources are tight. I may be mistaken in this recollection, but I don't recall Richard Leonard requesting additional money for universities in the recent budget. He'll correct me if I am wrong. But our universities are performing strongly. We have more top 200 universities per head of our population than any other country bar Switzerland. We're setting repeated records for students going to university from Scotland, and we see more people going to university from the poorest background. We've had massive progress in widening access. And of course, I'm sure Richard Leonard knows this because he will have read the Audit Scotland report in full, that while yes, it points to constraints in Scottish Government funding, some of the biggest funding challenges that it sets out for universities come from policies from the UK Government. Pension costs, the Augur review of tuition fees, and of course Brexit, which the report says threatens £211 million of funding from Scotland's universities. But Richard Leonard has made a specific request today for a 2% real terms increase in funding for universities. So I will make my usual offer to him, as I keep reminding him, we allocate all of the Scottish Government budget every year. So it's fully allocated to our hospitals, to our schools, to other local government services, to universities, to colleges. If Richard Leonard wants a 2% increase for universities on top of the increases he calls for local government and everything else that we're responsible for, then bring forward where in the Scottish budget you think we should make the reductions. I've asked Richard Leonard to do this on countless occasions now. He hasn't once come forward with any ideas. So, you know, maybe today will be different. The door is open, as always.
Thank you, President Officer. Transport Scotland officials reportedly told a meeting in Shetland earlier this week that the Government can no longer guarantee that the new Northern Isles ferry contract will be in place by the end of October, as previously promised. Can the First Minister confirm if that's the case? Does she accept that further delay in letting this contract creates uncertainty and makes it impossible for many businesses in Orkney and Shetland to plan for the future? And will she therefore ensure that the Government sticks to the October deadline?
First Minister.
Well, I absolutely agree that it is very important to communities in both Orkney and Shetland that they have certainty around the future contract. The Government is very keen to be able to stick to that deadline, and we'll set out, hopefully very soon, the outcome of that process. As Liam MacArthur is aware, we have been involved in legal challenges. The European Commission also has a role to play here, so there have been certain processes that have had to conclude and will have to conclude before we can announce the next steps forward, but we want to be in a position to do that as soon as possible.
Question number 3, Patrick Harvey.
5 years ago, the First Minister and I were both disappointed at the referendum result, but we were willing to work with those who promised to strengthen devolution and give the Scottish Parliament legal permanence. Instead, we've seen the UK lurch from crisis to crisis. We've seen the promises about protecting our place in Europe broken. We've seen the people of Scotland ignored, especially the 200,000 young voters and counting who have never had a vote on their country's future. And we've seen the UK Government treat devolution with utter contempt. Another referendum is coming. We all know that. Does the First Minister think that we can trust that the head of state won't once again be invited to interfere in a vote of the sovereign people?
First Minister.
Well, Scotland's future should always be a matter for the Scottish people. We know that support for independence is rising. Demand for another independence referendum is rising. And if you don't want to take my word for that, all I can do is quote polling expert John Curtis, who said yesterday that also becoming more difficult to sustain is the argument that Scotland does not want a second independence referendum. Scotland does have the right to choose our own future. I think the revelations, if I can call them that, from David Cameron today say more about him than they do about anybody else, and really demonstrate, I think, the panic that was in the heart of the UK Government in the run-up to the independence referendum 5 years ago. Of course, that is nothing compared to the panic that is in the heart of the unionist parties now about independence. They are progressively, one by one, making themselves look utterly ridiculous. They are reduced to trying to block Scotland's democratic right to choose, or rig Scotland's democratic right to choose, and all because they know they do not have the arguments against independence, and they know that when Scotland is given the right to choose, Scotland this time will choose to become an independent country.
Patrick Harvey.
Oh, just finally on independence, you know, I've... OK, presiding officer. OK, presiding officer, I probably have to admit this is not finally from me on independence. I may mention it again some point in the future. But I'm struck by the barracking and the heckling of the unionist parties in this chamber. I suspect the louder they get, the more obvious it is how panicked they are. And the big question for them is this. If they are so confident that people in Scotland don't want independence, why are they running so scared of an independence referendum?
Rennie.
It's 1 year since this Parliament voted to scrap national tests for 5-year-olds. Since then, the Scottish Government has ordered tests for another 50,000 Primary 1 pupils. Why has the First Minister allowed that in the face of the clear vote of Scotland's Parliament?
First Minister.
Well, after that vote, of course, the Deputy First Minister set out the action we were taking to respond to it. An independent review of Primary 1 assessments was carried out. That report was published. We set out our response to that, the changes that we were going to make, and that is the right and proper way to have proceeded. I think that the assessments we have in place in our school are proportionate and right. Of course, they didn't introduce assessment for the first time. All local authorities previously carried out assessments, some more than once a year. This is part of the process of making sure we have the information that allows us to determine whether our education system is delivering for the young people it serves, and we will continue to take that action because, again, that's what we owe to young people across the country. Parliament asked us to look at the evidence. That's what we did. We established the David Reedy review. He conducted a comprehensive independent review, speaking to many stakeholders, inviting written feedback from many. He spent considerable time in schools talking to teachers and children. He watched them undertake the assessments. It is absolute nonsense to suggest that David Reedy's report provided anything other than a clear recommendation that P1 assessments should continue. Research has shown that a majority of Primary 1 teachers believe the children in their classes had a positive experience overall. The review reported that there was scant evidence of children becoming upset that people like Willie Rennie had suggested. So we have taken the action to make sure that changes that were required are being made, but we will continue to take the action to ensure that we have the information, that teachers have the information about the performance of children so that they can help those children who need extra help and make sure that children are performing at the levels they should be. That's the right way to proceed, and we will continue to do so.
Tom Arthur.
Parliament will be aware of new research showing that EU citizens feel safer and more welcome in Scotland than in other parts of the UK. Can the First Minister reiterate that her government will always stand up for the rights of EU nationals living in Scotland?
First Minister.
We will do everything we can to stand up for and protect the rights of EU nationals. While I was reassured to read the research earlier this week that suggests EU nationals in Scotland feel safer and more comfortable in Scotland than in other parts of the UK. I find it distressing that EU nationals in any part of the UK don't feel safe and comfortable, and I find it deeply distressing that EU nationals have had to put up with the uncertainty and the stress and the anxiety that they've suffered now for more than 3 years. I think it is utterly shameful and disgraceful, and it is, in fact, in my view, one of the most shameful aspects of the whole Brexit fiasco. So I would again call on the UK Government to do everything it can to make sure that this anxiety for EU nationals stops, and that we continue to send the clearest possible message that we welcome people in our country, we want them to be here, we want them to stay, and we highly value the contribution that they make.
6, Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking to tackle the stigma surrounding HIV.
First Minister.
We're providing third sector funding of over £2 million over 3 years to support innovative work in sexual health and blood-borne viruses. That includes funding for Waverley Care to engage directly with people affected to inform the development and delivery of targeted service that challenge stigma and promote prevention, testing and support. A person diagnosed with HIV in Scotland today can expect to live a full life with near normal life expectancy, and a person with sustained undetectable levels of HIV in their blood cannot transmit HIV to their sexual partners. We will continue to work to eradicate the stigma around the virus and tackle the false myths and prejudices that sadly still surround it.
Brian Whittle.
Can I thank the First Minister for that answer, in which he joined me in commending former Welsh rugby captain Gareth Thomas in his continuing personal journey to tackle stigma and prejudice around homophobia and his recent HIV diagnosis, and in doing so condemn his disgraceful treatment by certain elements of the press and public. Given Mr Thomas's experience, does the First Minister agree with HIV Scotland that in the era of treatments such as PrEP, that it is now time for a public health campaign to end HIV stigma?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, can I join Brian Whittle in paying tribute to Gareth Thomas? I think his brave and very emotional intervention this week will have done a great deal to address the stigma here, and many people across the whole of the UK and further afield have reason to owe him a great deal of gratitude for that, and I'm sure we all send him our very best wishes. I do agree that there is much more to be done to tackle stigma here. We've all got a part to play in this, and I would say very bluntly, I think the media have a part to play in this as well, in making sure that they are not disseminating the myths and the false impressions of HIV that we often do read through the media. I do think there is an argument for a campaign, particularly given the successful introduction of PrEP, and we will continue to consider what work we can do to ensure that we are consigning this horrible stigma that wrecks people's lives to the dustbin of history, and I'm sure that's something that all of us will come together to do.
Thank you very much, and that concludes First Minister's questions.